Hello, my gardening friends. Welcome back to Earthly Delights. Have you ever walked into your garden in the morning and felt your heart drop? The kale you watered so carefully is curled with aphids. The squash vine that looked strong yesterday is collapsing. Ants march across the raised bed like they own the place. And all you can think is, how did this happen overnight? If you check the underside of leaves before breakfast, save scraps for compost, care about soil health, and still refuse to give up when pests come back, this story is for you. Maybe you grow vegetables in a backyard bed. Maybe you keep herbs on a patio, houseplants near a window, or tomatoes in containers. You are trying to grow clean food, protect your plants, and build a green sanctuary with your hands. I know that feeling because I lived it. Last summer, I stood in my garden and watched a 4-year battle with aphids and ants tear apart my brassica bed. I had already tried what most gardeners try first. I bought commercial sprays. I switched to organic options. I used neem oil again and again. I sprayed insecticidal soap. I picked pests by hand. I even released ladybugs, hoping nature would balance it. But nothing held for long. One rain, one hot week, one hidden colony under the mulch, and the problem came back stronger. I lost squash plants to squash bugs. I lost rows of kale to aphids. And I wasted money chasing solutions that worked for a moment, then disappeared. Then I tried one plain white powder that cost just a little over $2. In less than 9 days, the infestation I had fought for years began to collapse. The ants that had been farming those aphids vanished. Once the ants were gone, the aphids lost their protection, and the bed finally started to breathe again. But the deeper I looked into this powder, the stranger the story became. Why did something so cheap work so well? Why do so few modern gardeners talk about it clearly? And why has this same mineral become restricted, regulated, or tangled in pesticide rules across 19 states? Today, we are not just talking about a garden hack. We are going into the history, the chemistry, the risks, and the right way to think about a 1,000-year-old mineral that can affect ants, aphids, roaches, earwigs, squash bugs, and cutworms without treating your soil like a dumping ground. Stay with me until the end because I will also share the old molasses addition that made my bait more attractive. Before we dig in, subscribe to Earthly Delights because this channel is all about growing healthier plants, building richer soil, and solving garden problems with knowledge instead of panic. Body Pesty 1. The 1,000-year journey of a desert crystal. To understand why this simple powder works so well, we have to step away from the garden for a moment and travel far back in time. This is not some modern chemical invented in a sterile laboratory. Its story begins more than 1,000 years ago in the dry, wind-carved landscapes of the 8th century. Picture the seasonal lake beds of Tibet, where water would vanish under the sun and leave behind strange crystalline deposits in the earth. Early miners gathered this mineral by hand, and traders carried it across dangerous Himalayan routes into Persia, then slowly into Europe. In those days, people treated it almost like a household treasure. It was used to preserve meat, clean wool, soften water, and yes, even control insects. Centuries later, the story moved to the American desert. By the 1800s, large evaporite deposits were discovered in Death Valley, California. That is where the famous 20 mule teams hauled heavy wagons of raw mineral out of the brutal desert heat. Then, in the 1940s and 1950s, agricultural researchers from Purdue University and the United States Department of Agriculture began studying this mineral more seriously in field trials. What they found was remarkable. At very low concentrations, roughly between 1 and 5%, this mineral could collapse entire ant colonies within 7 to 10 days. Not by blasting the garden with harsh spray, but by working slowly through the colony itself. So the question is this: how did something known for more than 1,000 years slowly disappear from everyday gardening conversation? Why did a once common practice fade into the shadows while gardeners kept buying stronger and stronger sprays? To answer that, we need to understand the chemistry. Body 2, borax versus boric acid, the crucial difference. Before we go any further, we need to clear up one very important confusion. There are two powders that gardeners often mix up, and this mistake matters. Choosing the wrong one or using it the wrong way can damage your soil instead of solving your pest problem. The raw mineral from those desert deposits is called sodium tetraborate decahydrate. Most people know it as borax. This is the alkaline powder commonly found in the laundry aisle, often sold in that familiar green and white box. Borax has a high pH, around 9.2, which means it can affect the balance of your soil if it is dumped into the garden carelessly. But for the pest control method we are talking about, the material is different. The refined form is boric acid. Through chemical processing, borax can be converted into a finer, purer powder with a mildly acidic pH, around 5.1. Boric acid is the product usually sold for ant and roach control in hardware stores. If you use this approach, the label matters. You want a product that clearly says 99% boric acid, technical grade, with no fragrance, no added repellents, and no mystery ingredients mixed in. A small container is usually inexpensive, and because the method uses tiny amounts, it can last through several growing seasons. This is where many well-meaning gardeners get into trouble. They read one quick tip online, grab laundry borax, and scatter it around the bed. But borax is stronger, more alkaline, and not the same as boric acid. Used incorrectly, it can disturb the delicate life in your soil and still fail to fix the pest problem. In a healthy garden, precision matters more than panic. Body 3, the macabre science of eradication. So now we come to the question every gardener wants answered. How can such a simple mineral bring down an entire colony? The reason boric acid is so effective is that it does not work like a modern synthetic nerve spray. Many insects reproduce quickly, and with each short generation, they can slowly build resistance to the chemicals we keep spraying from plastic bottles. But they cannot adapt in the same way to the physical action of a mineral. Boric acid works in two ways at once. First, it acts as a stomach poison. When an insect eats the bait, the boron compound interferes with its digestive system and internal metabolism. It does not knock the insect down instantly. Instead, it damages the body from within. Second, it works by contact. Under a microscope, boric acid is not smooth and harmless looking. It has a fine crystalline structure that can be abrasive to small insects. When ants, roaches, earwigs, or soft-bodied pests move through it, the powder can scratch the waxy outer layer of their bodies. That waxy coating is what helps them hold moisture. Once it is damaged, the insect begins to dry out, lose water, and die within a day or two. But with ants, the real power comes from their own social behavior. Ants share food through a process called trophallaxis. A worker ant finds the bait, eats a small amount, and because the dose is low, she does not die right away. She carries it back underground, where she shares it with larvae, other workers, and eventually the queen. That is why patience matters. You are not trying to kill the first worker ant you see on the surface. You are trying to let the bait travel through the colony. When it reaches the heart of the nest, the whole system begins to collapse from the inside. It is slow, targeted, and extremely effective when used with care. Body 4, the regulatory rabbit hole. Is it really restricted in 19 states? Now we need to talk about the part that makes people nervous. The claim that this $2 powder is restricted, regulated, or even called banned in 19 states. At first, that sounds terrifying. If it comes from a natural mineral, why would regulators care so much? The answer is not as simple as a dramatic headline. Boric acid is not banned everywhere in one clean, simple way. The confusion comes from pesticide laws, product labels, dealer licenses, and state rules that most home gardeners never read. The first issue is boron itself. Boron is a real plant micronutrient. Plants need tiny amounts of it for healthy growth. But the safe range is narrow. A little can help. Too much can harm. If large amounts of borates are spread over soil, they dissolve easily, move with water, and can build up where roots are growing. That can lead to phytotoxicity, which means yellow leaves, stunted plants, weak growth, and in serious cases, crop failure. This is why regulators worry about large-scale misuse. A careful backyard gardener using tiny targeted amounts is not the same as someone dumping cups of product into a vegetable bed or across a field. The danger comes from careless use, repeated heavy use, and using the wrong product in the wrong place. The second issue is labeling. In the United States, pesticide use is controlled by federal law under FIFRA. the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. In simple terms, you are supposed to use a product according to its label. A laundry product is not automatically legal to use as a garden pesticide just because it contains a related boron compound. Then there is the health side. Boric acid and borax are not harmless fairy dust. They must be kept away from children and pets, and they should not be inhaled, swallowed, or handled carelessly. Repeated or high exposure has been connected with serious health concerns, which is why some agencies and safety groups treat boron compounds with caution. So the real lesson is this: the mineral is not something to fear blindly, but it is also not something to throw around casually. It is restricted and regulated because dose, placement, and product label matter. In the garden, respect is what separates a useful tool from a costly mistake. Respect the chemistry, respect the soil, and use knowledge before you use anything else. Body 5. Method 1. The Trojan horse bait. Now that we understand both the science and the caution behind this mineral, the next question is simple. How do we use it without harming the garden we are trying to save? The first method is the one I use when ants and aphids are working together. I call it the Trojan horse bait. If you have aphids, there is a very good chance you also have ants. Ants do not just wander around your plants by accident. They often protect aphids like tiny livestock, guarding them from ladybugs and other predators because aphids produce a sweet liquid called honeydew. So if you only spray the aphids, the ants may simply bring the problem back again. That is why the target is not just the pest on the leaf. The target is the colony behind the problem. For this bait, take 1 cup of warm water and dissolve 3 tablespoons of white sugar into it. Then stir in 1 teaspoon of 99% pure boric acid powder until it disappears into the mixture. The goal is not to make a harsh, powerful poison. The goal is to make a low-dose bait that works slowly. And that slow action is the whole secret. If the mixture is too strong, the worker ant dies too quickly, right there near the bait station. But if the dose is low, she has time to drink it, carry it back to the nest, and share it with the rest of the colony. Soak a few cotton balls in the mixture and place them in small, shallow lids, like the lid from a peanut butter jar. Then place those lids under a rock, under a board, or beneath an upside-down flower pot with a small opening. This helps keep rain off the bait, keeps it away from bees and other pollinators, and reduces the chance that children or pets can reach it. Within about 48 hours, you may see more ants than before. Do not panic. That usually means the bait has been found. By day 7 to day 9, the trails often begin to disappear. And once the ants are gone, the aphids lose their bodyguards. Then ladybugs, lacewings, and other natural predators finally have a chance to bring balance back to the plants. Body 6, Methods 2 and 3, Precision Dusting and Perimeter Barriers. But ants are only one part of the garden battle. What about the pests that are not interested in sweet liquid bait? What about squash bugs, cucumber beetles, earwigs, and cutworms hiding near the base of your plants? That is where the second method comes in, precision dusting. For this, use a small plastic squeeze bottle with a narrow tip and fill it with dry boric acid powder. Then apply only a very light dusting, about 1/4 teaspoon, directly on the soil near the base of the plant stem. The key word here is precision. This is not something you throw across the whole bed, and it is not something you blow over the leaves. Never dust the leaves, never dust flowers, and never place it where bees or other pollinators are feeding. The point is to put the powder only where crawling pests travel, especially around the lower stem and soil surface. Used this way, it becomes a targeted barrier instead of a broad attack on every insect in the garden. Then we come to the third method, the perimeter barrier. This is useful when pests keep crawling into your raised beds from the edges. I place an extremely thin dry line of boric acid along the inside wooden frame of the bed, about 1/8 of an inch wide. Crawling insects such as earwigs, slugs, and other ground-moving pests do not like crossing that dry mineral line because the powder clings to their bodies and legs. But remember, this barrier does not last forever. Rain, irrigation, and heavy moisture can dilute it, move it, or wash it away. After a strong summer rain, you may need to reapply a very thin line if the pest pressure is still active. And here is the rule I want every gardener to remember. Never till boric acid into your soil. Never mix it deep into the bed. It belongs only on the surface, in small targeted places, and only when there is a real pest problem. If you respect that rule, you are using a tiny amount with purpose instead of treating your living soil carelessly. In gardening, the right placement often matters more than the strongest product. Body 7, the ancient Tibetan molasses secret. And now we come to the small addition that changed the way I make this bait. Once you understand the colony, the chemistry, and the importance of slow delivery, the next step is not making the bait stronger. It is making the bait more attractive. When I studied the older stories around this mineral, especially the trade routes that moved through Tibet and into other parts of Asia, one detail stood out. People were not always mixing mineral powders with plain water alone. In many traditional uses, they combined them with thick, dark, unrefined sugars. In India, one well-known form is jaggery. In North America, the closest easy option for most gardeners is blackstrap molasses. So now, when I make my standard bait, I still begin with 1 cup of warm water, 3 tablespoons of white sugar, and 1 teaspoon of 99% boric acid. But then I add 1 tablespoon of thick blackstrap molasses and stir until the whole mixture becomes dark, sweet, and deeply scented. Why does this matter? Because ants and roaches are not only looking for sweetness, they are drawn to complex sugars, minerals, and strong food signals. Plain sugar water works, but molasses makes the bait richer and harder for them to ignore. In my own garden, the difference was obvious. Colonies that took around 9 or 10 days to fade with plain sugar bait often collapsed closer to 5 or 6 days when molasses was added. That is the lesson here. You do not need to overload the recipe. You do not need to pour more powder into the garden. You simply make the bait something the insects want to carry home. A small container, a cotton ball, a careful dose, and 1 spoonful of molasses can turn a slow bait station into one that gets emptied before evening. Conclusion. So what have we really learned today? This is not just a story about a cheap white powder or a clever way to stop ants, aphids, earwigs, squash bugs, roaches, and cutworms. It is a reminder that good gardening begins with understanding. When we know the history of a material, we use it with more respect. When we understand the science, we stop guessing. And when we care about the soil, we stop treating the garden like a battlefield and start treating it like a living system. That is why I never want you to hear this as a license to scatter powders everywhere. The goal is not more product. The goal is better placement. A bait station where ants feed. A light dusting only where crawling pests travel. A thin barrier only where pests are entering. Always away from flowers, always away from pollinators, always away from children and pets, and never mix deep into the soil. Last summer, the brassica bed I had almost given up on finally came back. The kale that used to curl under aphids grew broad, clean leaves again. The ants stopped defending the colonies. Natural predators returned. And for the first time in years, that small bed gave me the kind of harvest that reminds you why you started gardening in the first place. Gardening is not about knowing every answer from the beginning. It is about observing, learning, adjusting, and respecting the balance beneath your feet. Sometimes the solution is not the newest bottle on the shelf. Sometimes it is an old idea used carefully with modern caution and a little common sense. So tell me in the comments, what pest is causing the most trouble in your garden right now? Is it aphids, ants, squash bugs, earwigs, cutworms, or something else entirely? If this deep dive helped you see your garden differently, hit the like button, subscribe to Earthly Delights, and share this with a gardener who is fighting the same battle. Until next time, keep your hands in the soil, keep learning from the earth, and keep finding the earthly delights all around you.